Welcome to a deep dive all about Nigeria's national security strategy. You've probably heard about some of the challenges that Nigeria faces.
Yeah.
Boko Haram is one,
Right.
but it goes so far beyond that.
It really does.
We're talking terrorism, border security, even cyber threats. We're talking about the environment. Like all of these different threads are woven into this, honestly, really ambitious strategy that they've put forward.
Yeah, it's a really fascinating document. They call it an overview of the Nigerian National Security Strategy. And it really does lay out like their game plan for creating a safer future for Nigeria.
Okay, so before we get into the nuts and bolts of the strategy itself, can you give us a little context? Like, why does Nigeria need this new approach? What's the backstory here?
Yeah, so it's not like they just woke up one day and said, let's completely overhaul our security strategy. There were a lot of factors that led up to this 2019 revised strategy document. One of the biggest ones is that the security challenges facing Nigeria, they've just become more and more complex over the past decade or so. You've got internal conflicts, you've got transnational terrorism, organized crime, and they realized that the old ways of addressing these issues just weren't working. So this 2019 strategy, it's really about recognizing that everything's connected and that you need a much more holistic approach to security if you really want to tackle these challenges effectively.
So it's not just swapping out old tactics for new ones. They're really fundamentally changing the way they think about security itself.
Exactly. And they've broken down this new approach into 7 key pillars, which we can get into.
7. Okay, well, let's take them one by one then. What's that first pillar all about?
So the first pillar is all about protecting Nigeria's sovereignty. And when we talk about sovereignty, we're talking about protecting their territory, right? So think about it. Nigeria, it's got over 4,000 kilometers of land borders with its neighbors. And they've had real issues with things like arms smuggling, for example, coming from places like Libya and Chad. And all of that has a direct impact on their internal security. So this pillar, it's about strengthening those borders, making it much harder for these external threats to even enter the country in the first place.
Wow. Yeah, that's a huge logistical challenge if you think about it. But it sounds like they're not just focused on, hardening the borders, keeping things out. They're also tackling those internal factors that can make a country vulnerable, which brings us to that next pillar, right? Combating terrorism.
Absolutely. And you're right. This goes way beyond just military action. The strategy really emphasizes community engagement, addressing the root causes of radicalization. They even talk about programs for reintegrating former fighters back into society. Imagine like trying to rebuild trust in a community that has been ravaged by Boko Haram violence for years. It's a massive, massive undertaking.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like a multi-pronged approach, going after the ideology, providing opportunities for people, rebuilding communities from the ground up.
Precisely.
Yes.
It's about recognizing that military might alone won't solve this problem.
Speaking of military might, that next pillar is internal security. Is that where we see the more traditional security forces come into play?
Absolutely. So this pillar is about addressing the threats that hit closer to home. Things like banditry, kidnapping, those everyday security concerns that really directly impact people's lives. And here they're really focusing on empowering local police forces, building trust within communities, and tackling the underlying causes of crime and violence. Things like poverty, lack of opportunity.
So it's about creating a safer environment from the inside out. And then we shift gears a little bit with the next pillar, which is cybersecurity. I imagine that's something that has become really crucial for any nation, but especially one that's grappling with so many other security challenges at the same time.
Oh, absolutely. And in Nigeria's case, we're not just talking about protecting banks and financial institutions from cyber attacks. It's about safeguarding critical infrastructure,
Yeah.
the power grid, communications networks, all of those things that could really cripple the entire nation if they were targeted. So the strategy really stresses the need for robust cyber defenses, constant vigilance, being able to anticipate threats, and international cooperation on this front.
So it's about anticipating those threats before they even arise, not just reacting after the fact.
Exactly. And it highlights how interconnected security has become in the 21st century. But, Nigeria's strategy, it goes even further. They're one of the few countries that I've seen that actually recognizes that a nation's economy, is also a key factor in its security.
That's the economic security pillar, right?
Yes.
I have to admit, that one really caught my eye because I wouldn't have immediately connected those two things, but it makes so much sense when you actually think about it.
It's a crucial insight,
Yeah.
and it really shows how forward-thinking this strategy is. They're basically acknowledging that, widespread poverty, high levels of unemployment, these things can actually drive people towards crime, make them more susceptible to recruitment by extremist groups. So this pillar focuses on promoting sustainable economic growth, job creation, and making sure that everyone benefits from that growth. It's about recognizing that true security isn't just about military might, it's also about creating a society where people have a stake in peace.
It's about giving people a reason to choose peace and stability over conflict and chaos, right?
Absolutely.
Wow. Now, this one really surprised me, I have to say. Environmental security. How does that fit into the picture?
Yeah, it's one that's easy to overlook. But when you actually start to think about the security implications of things like, conflicts over resources, climate change leading to displacement, you start to realize that it's actually a really critical piece of the puzzle. So, for example, imagine farmers and herders clashing over shrinking water resources, something that unfortunately is already happening in many parts of Nigeria.
Right.
That can escalate incredibly quickly and turn into a major security crisis.
Absolutely.
So this pillar, it's all about promoting sustainable resource management, addressing environmental challenges before they morph into full-blown security crises.
It's about recognizing that environmental degradation, it can be what they call like a threat multiplier, right?
Exactly.
It can exacerbate existing tensions, create new ones.
You hit the nail on the head. And that actually brings us to the final pillar, which is regional and global cooperation.
Because no country is an island, especially in today's interconnected world.
Exactly. And Nigeria recognizes that it can't tackle these challenges alone. They need to work with their neighbors, with regional blocs like ECOWAS, which is the Economic Community of West African States, and with global organizations like the UN. It's about sharing intelligence, coordinating operations, and really trying to present a united front against these cross-border threats.
Okay, so we've laid out this incredibly ambitious plan, like this holistic vision for a more secure Nigeria. But we all know, with any kind of blueprint like this, the devil's always in the details.
Right.
So let's shift gears a bit and talk about the challenges of actually implementing a strategy like this. What are some of the biggest hurdles that they're facing?
Well, right off the bat, you have to talk about resources.
Right.
I mean, even the best laid plans need funding. You need to train and equip security forces. You need to invest in cutting-edge technology, especially if you're talking about combating cyber threats. And all of that comes at a price. And this can be a major challenge, especially in a country like Nigeria that's facing a lot of competing economic priorities.
It's like trying to build a high-tech security system, but you've only got a shoestring budget.
Exactly. And then on top of that, you have the issue of corruption, which has been a persistent problem in Nigeria. And that can really undermine even the most well-intentioned efforts. There have been reports of, security funds being misappropriated, which means that essential equipment isn't being procured.
Yeah.
And all of that just trickles down and impacts the morale and effectiveness of the security forces.
It's like trying to build a house on a foundation of sand. No matter how strong you make that structure itself, it's still going to be shaky.
A very apt analogy. That's why this strategy really emphasizes transparency and accountability within the security sector, because they know that that's been a problem.
Yeah.
But it's not just about resources and corruption. I mean, effective implementation also really hinges on coordination, or rather a lack of coordination.
Right.
You've got all these different agencies, right? The military, the police, the intelligence services, getting all of them on the same page, working together seamlessly, that is absolutely crucial.
Yeah, because if they're not careful, you end up with these bureaucratic silos, right?
Exactly.
Where you've got these different agencies, they're not sharing information, maybe they're even working at cross purposes. It's a recipe for disaster.
Precisely. And that can have real-world consequences.
Right.
Imagine a scenario where one agency has intelligence about a potential attack, but that information isn't shared with the other relevant agencies in a timely manner. So the strategy recognizes this challenge and stresses the need for much better interagency coordination, clear communication channels, joint training programs, that kind of thing.
So it's about breaking down those walls and getting everyone to work together towards that common goal.
Exactly. But even with sufficient resources, a real crackdown on corruption and much better coordination, there's another piece of the puzzle that's absolutely crucial, and that's public trust.
Yeah, and that's something that you've touched on a little bit throughout our conversation, but it seems particularly important in a country as diverse and complex as Nigeria.
It's absolutely essential. Because ultimately, if the people don't trust the security forces, they're going to be much less likely to cooperate with them. They're not going to share information. They might even see them more as a threat than as protectors.
Especially in areas where there's been conflict or where there's a history of human rights abuses by security forces. I mean, that trust, it's even harder to build and it's so easily broken.
You're absolutely right. And that's why the strategy really talks about the need for, things like community policing models, where security forces are seen as partners, not occupiers. It's about addressing legitimate grievances that communities might have, ensuring accountability if there is wrongdoing, and really involving communities in the security planning process.
So it's not just about hardware and technology, it's about, like you said, building relationships, fostering that sense of shared responsibility for security.
100%.
Yeah, it really highlights how interwoven all of these challenges are. It's not just about like having the strongest military or the most, whiz bang high tech equipment. It's about addressing these really fundamental underlying issues and building trust and creating this system where everyone feels like they have a stake in it.
Exactly. You can have, like you said, you can have the best strategy in the world written out on paper, but if you don't have those elements in place, the resources, the accountability, the public buy-in, it's going to be incredibly difficult to make it work in the real world.
So to kind of bring it all together then, it seems like Nigeria is taking a really comprehensive approach to security with this strategy. Like they're
Mhm.
recognizing that it's not just about fighting wars or, combating terrorism, but about addressing all of these social and economic and environmental factors that we've been talking about that really contribute to instability.
Absolutely. That's a great way to put it. They're acknowledging that true, lasting security, it requires what they often call a whole of society approach.
Yeah.
And, I think that's what makes this strategy so interesting to me is just so ambitious and far reaching.
But as we've been discussing, the path to implementation, it's definitely paved with a lot of obstacles. The resource constraints that we talked about, corruption, the need for better coordination, and then that really essential element of building public trust. These aren't easy challenges to overcome.
Definitely not. And I think it really highlights just how complex security has become in the 21st century. It's a multidimensional problem. And, Nigeria is really trying to put all the pieces of the puzzle together in a way that they hope will create a more stable and prosperous future.
Which leads to, I think, the kind of heart of the matter here. Will they succeed? I mean, knowing what we know now about the strategy itself, but also about some of the challenges that they're facing, what do you think will be most crucial for Nigeria if they want to actually achieve those goals that they've set out?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And unfortunately, there's no easy answer. But if I had to pick one thing, I think it really comes down to that human element. Yes, resources are important. Yes, tackling corruption is vital. But ultimately, success or failure, I think it hinges on their ability to build trust. Trust between citizens and security forces, trust between different government agencies, trust between Nigeria and its international partners. Without that foundation of trust, even the most well-crafted strategy is likely to falter.
It's a really powerful insight, I think, to end on that human element, that sense of shared purpose and shared responsibility might actually be the most important factor in determining whether they can really achieve these really ambitious goals that they've set out.
I think so.
Well, this has been a fascinating deep dive. I feel like you've given us so much to think about. It's clear that Nigeria's security landscape is incredibly complex, and there are no easy solutions here. But by acknowledging just how interconnected these challenges are and really taking this comprehensive, holistic approach, I think Nigeria is taking a really important step toward a more secure future for themselves. So thank you so much for joining us on this journey. And for our listeners, we encourage you to, keep exploring this really critical topic. There's always so much more to learn.
If you found this discourse on the Nigeria's security strategy insightful, don't forget to smash that like button, hit the subscribe button, and turn on notifications so you never miss out next one. Let's keep this conversation going. Share this video with friends, students, researchers, and other members of the academia for educational purpose. Together, we can raise awareness and promote meaningful dialogue on critical issues. Thanks for watching or listening, and I'll see you in the next one.